Hello, everybody. I'm Ollie Lan, an engineer on the Android Wear team.
And I'm Tony Ferreira, a designer on Android Wear.
It's great to be here. We're really excited to tell you about the new stuff coming to watch faces on Android Wear. The watch face is at the heart of the Android Wear interface. Of course, it tells the time. And with the thousands of watch faces on Google Play, it's a great way for users to express their style. We added interactivity last year, and the watch face came to life, like never before. But the watch face can do more. As an always-on screen that's just a glance away, it's a great place to get the information you care about. And that's why we're introducing the Complications API for Android Wear.
But first of all, what are complications? The term comes from traditional watchmaking, and it means, well, pretty much anything that's not telling the time. Complications on mechanical watches show things like the date, your alarm, or phase of the moon. So the small dials you see on this watch, they're complications. On smartwatches, there are new possibilities, like the weather, stock prices, or events from your calendar.
Many watch faces on Android Wear already include complications, like bits from Us Two, or legacy from Zoo Handen. But as it stands, each watch face has to go and get the data itself. That could mean your watch face has to find its own source of weather data, or finance data, or anything else you want to show. And if the user wants to see something you haven't included, they're out of luck. Or maybe you're not a watch face developer, but your app has data that would be great on the watch face, like fitness stats or finance info. As it stands, there's no way to do this other than building your own watch face or making deals with individual watch face developers. The Complications API for Android Wear changes all of this. Apps using the API will be data providers or watch faces. If you build a watch face using the Complications API, then you get access to a whole ecosystem of data providers. Here are just some of the partners already working on using the API. And if you build a data provider, you can get your data on a whole range of watch faces. Now, on Google Play, there's a huge range of styles of watch faces. So there's no way that just one style, one visual style of complication would fit on every watch face. Because of that, with the Complications API, the watch face gets to decide how to render the data. It gets to choose the visual style, the colors, the fonts, etc. The data provider just provides raw fields like strings, text, images, and numbers. Before we get into the details of the API, though, Tony's going to go through some things to think about when designing for complications.
Thanks, Ollie. So some of you may have already checked out the material design spec for wearables. In there, you'll find a ton of useful things to help developers and designers design for Android Wear. I'd like to highlight some of the things, some of those design principles that you'll find in there and how they apply to complications. So the first design principle is glanceable, making things clear and understandable. For complications, small, easy to read snippets of information work best. It's very important that the information on the watch face is organized with a clear hierarchy, large enough to read easily, and high enough in contrast. Users shouldn't need to squint to read the UI. The second design principle is time saving, getting the information you want quickly without any roadblocks. Instead of navigating to your favorite apps to find the information you want, with the introduction of complications, it's right there on the watch face. Complications are also tappable, so you can deep link to your favorite contact or upcoming calendar event. And complications are also persistent, there whenever you need them. The third design principle is consistent. Complications should have a healthy relationship with the watch face. As Ollie just said, with complications on Android Wear, the watch face decides how the complications are rendered. So they feel part of the same family, consider aligning the style of the complications with the watch face. Ollie is now going to talk you through the complication types.
Thanks, Tony. So complications are all about data, supplied by provider apps and displayed on watch faces. This could include numerical data, like your battery level, text, like the title of your next meeting, or images, like an icon or a profile pic. Not every type of data will fit on every watch face. There might only be space for a small icon or a short bit of text. Or you might want to use numerical data without having to show text or images. So watch faces need to say what they can display, and data providers need to say what they can supply. To help with this, we've defined a number of complication types. Complication types determine what kinds of data are included. There's usually one field that's the key piece of information, and we've named the types after that field. So here you see examples of the short text type. These are all short text complications, but as you can see, there are optional elements. There may be an icon or a second string, but the most important value is contained in the short text field. If you're a data provider, you can choose which of the optional fields to include, but a short text complication must always include the short text field. If you're building a watch face and you support short text, you need to consider all of these variations. Here are some other examples. You might not need any text to convey the information. Then maybe the icon type is enough. Or if you have numerical data within bounds, like a percentage, then the ranged value type could be for you. We also have a few other types. You'll notice that we have both icon and small image. The difference is that images for the icon field should be tintable by the watch face. They should be single color with a transparent background. This allows the watch face to fit it better to its style. So if you're building a watch face where full color images won't match the style, then you can support the icon type, but you might not want to support the small image type, where images may be full color. So when you're thinking about the different complication types, if you're building a provider, think about the different forms your data can take. And if you're building complications into a watch face, think about how many of the types you want to support. Now back to Tony to talk about some more guidelines for watch face developers.
OK, so I want to talk a little bit about the things you should consider when designing complications. However, bear in mind, there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution to this. We have a diverse collection of watch faces on the platform, and we think it's important that complications are flexible enough to mirror that diversity. So please use these guidelines as a starting point. But if you feel your watch face would benefit from deviating from these guidelines, then by all means, please do so. Complications should never conflict with the surrounding objects on the watch face. For more traditional watch face layouts, as shown here, these red areas, in general, shouldn't house complications, as there will be a conflict with other parts of the watch face. Give your complications a bit of space so they have room to breathe as well. And if possible, staying true to the alignment of the watch face will also help you achieve better balance. So if you have a center-aligned clock, it might make sense to center-align the complications as well. Complications can be rendered however you wish, though you might want to give your data a little more protection and house them in a container. So we found these form factors work well with the various data types. We have circle, square, pill, and rectangle. And bear in mind, the size and form of these containers decide what data types can and can't be rendered. And containers are optional. Sometimes they help, sometimes they don't. But the important thing to remember as a watch face developer is you have the freedom to choose. Building a strong relationship with the watch face is also very important. You don't want your complications to seem like an afterthought. So here are some things to consider. Use color to tint the data. This will help create better harmony with the watch face. Decide whether your complications need containers or not. You can see in this example in the middle, we've removed the containers just to help the complications better integrate into the watch face. And play around with scale. This will help you achieve better visual hierarchy. But most importantly, on top of all of that, just have fun with them and don't be scared to get creative. You can have multiple complications on a watch face. This is awesome for those of us who want to surface lots of data. Here you can see we've removed the containers and to create more space, and we can easily fit 8 complications on a single watch face. If multiple complications is a direction you wish to go down, just try to make sure that things don't get too cluttered and the UI remains glanceable. The Complications API can also be used as a creative tool. With the ranged value data type, you can abstract that data whichever way you like. So in the example we've shown here, we display your step count goal. Throughout the day, as you get closer to reaching your step count goal, the graphic in the background also updates. Presenting the data like this, in an unconventional and abstract way, opens the door for more fun and engaging watch faces. And just to finish, here are a few examples of implemented complications designed by our creative partners, us two. In the first example here, you can see they've kept things simple and found a straightforward way of adding complications to a pre-existing watch face, removing containers and tinting the data. The second example is a little more bespoke. They've used their creative license and played around with things like the layout and the form factors. This helps better align the complications with the watch face aesthetic. And the last example is where we've had some fun with the ranged value data type, creating a really cool generative abstract design. In this example, you can imagine your daily step count or battery level being represented. I'll now hand you over to Ollie, who's going to talk you through the details of the API.
Thanks, Tony. OK, so let's take a look at how this all fits together. Android Wear manages the flow of data between data providers and watch faces. When data is needed for a complication, Android Wear will send an update request to the data provider asking for a specific type of data. The provider builds a complication data object of that type with the required fields and sends it back to Wear. Android Wear then forwards that onto the watch face, which can then include it when it renders. Android Wear also provides the UI that allows users to choose providers for each complication, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But now, let's take a look at what you need to do to add complications to a watch face. So first of all, you need to decide how many complications to include and what types to support in each one. So for this example, let's say you want to include a small round complication on the rate. Now, in that space, we could support short text. We could also support icon. And there's also enough space there to show a ranged value. Now, in that space, we could, if we wanted, support small image as well, but let's say for this example that we don't want to. Now, let's say we also want to include a complication at the bottom. This one could support the same types as the first one. But there's also enough space to make this one wider. So it could support the long text type. Note that we consider this to be the same complication, even though it's a different shape depending on the type. So to summarize, these are the types supported by each of those complications. One more thing, you need to give each complication a numerical ID so that you can refer to it with the system. That's chosen by the watch face. We call it the watch face complication ID, and it can be any integer. OK, so next you need a way for the user to choose providers for each complication. As I mentioned earlier, Android Wear provides the UI to choose a provider for a particular complication, but the rest of the UI is up to you. So what we're showing here on the slide is a basic list that could be part of the watch face's config activity. That's the watch face's own settings. So this screen is not provided by the system. So when the user taps on an item in this list, the watch face needs to launch that system provider chooser. Let's look at some code. So in order to do that, you use this support library method to get hold of an intent. That's create provider chooser intent. You pass in the watch face component name. That's the package and class name of your watch face. That's just how you refer to your watch face to the system. And you also pass in the watch face complication ID for the complication that is being configured. So that's the number we chose earlier. You then pass in the types supported by that complication. In this list, the order does matter. You list them in order of preference, with the most preferred coming first. In this example, we've put ranged value at the top. That's because that type conveys the most information to the user, so that's often a good choice, and that's a good way to think about this. OK, so then when you have the intent, you call start activity for result to show the system provider chooser. So when the user taps on an item in this list, the system provider chooser is shown. Now, when the user chooses a provider in this UI, it gets set up automatically. You don't need to do anything else. OK, so to show the data, what you need to do is tell the system that your watch face is ready to receive it. So let's move into the watch face service itself, specifically the engine. So what you need to do is call set active complications and pass in the watch face complication IDs for the complications that are ready. Here we're showing it done in onCreate of the engine. That's usually a good place to do it, but you can call this method from elsewhere, for example, if the active complications change. Once you've done that, you will start to receive data in calls to the onComplication data update method. The data will come with the watch face complication ID that it relates to. Now, you'll only receive data when it changes, so you'll have to hold on to the complication data object. And any images, such as icons, should be loaded asynchronously, and be sure to cache them. Now, once you've got the data, it's up to you how to incorporate it into your watch face. But before rendering it, you need to check if the data is still active. Some complication data is only valid until a certain time. So for example, it might be for a next event complication, and then the piece of data will only be relevant up until the end of that event. You check it using this method, the isActive method on the complication data. So you just pass in the current time when you're drawing a frame to see if you still need to draw that data. There's one other thing you should do, which is to check to see if complications are tapped on. You do this using the interactive watch faces APIs that we announced last year. So that is by implementing onTap command. If a complication is tapped on, then you need to check the complication data to see if it specifies a tap action pending intent. If there is one, you need to fire that intent when the complication is tapped on. This allows deep linking from the complication straight into a relevant activity. OK, so that's how to add complications to your watch face. One important tip that goes for watch face development in general, but particularly for complications, is minimize the work you do in every draw call, especially if you're drawing more than once a second. Avoid object creation in onDraw wherever possible, as that can lead to a lot of garbage collection and hence poor performance. OK, so now let's take a look at how to build a complication data provider. A data provider is a service, and to create one, you need to extend Complication Provider service from the support library. This class has one abstract method that you must implement. That is onComplicationUpdate. This method is called whenever the system wants data from you. So it will be called when a complication using your provider is activated, by which I mean when the watch face calls set active complications. And it will also be called when your provider is chosen for a complication that's already active. It can also be called with a certain frequency, such as every hour, if that's what you want. And it's also possible to trigger updates if you need a push style. For example, if you have a messaging app and you want to update a complication when a message arrives, you could do this. If you want more information on that, then check out the Provider Update Request class in the Preview Support library. OK, so let's take a look at how you might, an example of how you might implement this method. So you'll see that one of the parameters is the type. That's the complication type that's required. And first thing we're going to do is check that. Now, in this example, we're only going to support short text. In a real-world example, you would probably support more than one type. So first thing now is we start building a complication data object of that type short text. And now we're setting the short text field, which is the required field for this type, and we're just setting it to a simple string, hello. You'll notice that it's wrapped here in a complication text object. All of the set methods for text in complication data take one of these complication text objects. It can just be a wrapper for a simple string or char sequence. It can also be used for other things, and we'll talk about that a bit later. OK, so we're also going to specify an icon. That's an optional field for short text. All of the image set methods for complication data use the icon class from the Android framework. That allows it to be either a wrapper for a resource from your application, a drawable resource, or it could also be a bitmap. However, as I mentioned earlier, the icon field images should always be tintable. So they should be single color with a transparent background. And we strongly recommend you use vector drawables for this. That's because the watch face could draw the icon at different sizes, and using a vector will allow it to resize cleanly. OK, so that completes the complication data object for this example. All you need to do next is send that data to the system, and you do that using the complication manager object, which is passed in as a parameter to onComplicationUpdate. OK, there are two other methods that you can optionally implement. They are onComplicationActivated and onComplicationDeactivated. Complications are activated when the watch face calls set active complications, and they are deactivated either by another call to set active complications with different IDs, or when the user changes watch face. Now, as a service, your provider has to be declared in the manifest. And that's also where you use metadata to declare things like what types you can support and what update period you would like, if any. Here, with the supported types, the order does not matter, and that's because, as I mentioned earlier, the watch face gets to decide the order of preference for any particular complication. Now, for the update period, be aware that the update period is not guaranteed. We do apply a minimum. The system applies a minimum. So you should think in terms of minutes or longer, not seconds. And particularly in ambient mode, or when the device isn't being worn, update requests might come less frequently. Try to make the update period as long as is reasonably possible. Getting updates too often could impact battery life. If your provider doesn't need regular updates at all, then you can just set this to 0, and then you won't get any calls beyond the initial one. Now, one example where you might think you want to update every minute is where you're displaying something related to the time on the watch face. So here, you can see two complications where the text changes every minute. We've got a world clock and the time to my next event. But it would be wasteful to wake up the provider every minute. And there's no guarantee that the update request would come in at the point where the minute changes. Even the date complication here shouldn't need to update. Even though it would be only once a day, there's no guarantee the update will come at the stroke of midnight, so it would be showing incorrect data at certain times of day. So instead, the API allows you to use time-dependent text. For text that represents the current time, we have time format text. And for text that represents the time to or from a given time, use time difference text. Let's take a look at an example. So let's say that we're building a complication showing the time to my next meeting. And we're using the short text type. So I'm building complication data of type short text. We saw earlier that set short text takes a complication text object. And that's so that here we can pass in a different kind of complication text object. So we're going to use time difference builder to create one. So passing into the builder, we need to set the reference period. That is the time that the text relates to. So in this case, it's the time of my next event. Let's say that's from 4 p.m. until 5 p.m. In that case, start time here is 4 p.m., end time here is 5 p.m. Now we add a style. So this just determines how the text is formatted, is displayed. In this case, we're using short dual unit. That means, for example, if the time difference was 5 hours and 15 minutes, it would show 5H15M. That completes the time difference text. So we call build. There's one more thing. As I mentioned earlier, complication data is can cease to be valid after a certain time, and that is the case here. And it's particularly important here because the time difference text is the time to the event, but it's also the time since the event. So if it were 10 minutes after my event, then the complication might show 10M, which is not what we want. So we have to set an end time so that it shows nothing after the event. OK, so that completes the complication data. So we just call build. And let's see what that would look like on the watch face. So the event is at 4 p.m. 1 hour and 45 minutes before, we would see this. At 3:45 p.m., we would see this. So although it's the short dual unit style, when it's only minutes, we only show the minutes. We never show seconds in this style. During the event, we would show this. So the time difference text actually shows the text now. And these strings, all of these strings are localized according to the locale of the device. After the event, we see nothing because we set the end time. So for more details of the types and styles of time-dependent text, check out the complication text class in the wearable support preview. OK, so that's the complications API for both data providers and for watch faces. We're really excited to see how you all make use of it.
Thanks. So if you like what you've heard here today and you'd like to try it out, you can. Just go to g.co/wearpreview. You can find out about how to get the preview SDK, device images, and more information about the APIs we're launching. The dev preview also includes this watch face. It's called Elements, and it supports a variety of complication types, so you can test any data providers you build. The preview does include a few providers, like battery level, world clock, and date. You can use these to test the complications on your watch face. Here's a list of the Android Wear sessions that were on today at I/O. And don't worry if you've missed any of them, because they'll all be on YouTube soon.
So if you'd like to have a go at creating a watch face with complications or building a data provider, do check out the code labs. You can do them here at I/O, or you can go to g.co/codelabs/io16/wear. We'd also love to hear any feedback you have on the API. So if you find any bugs, or if you have any suggestions or questions, please go to g.co/wearpreviewbug. And finally, if you'd like to discuss the Complications API or anything else about Android Wear with other developers, go along to our Android Wear developers G+ community at g.co/androidweardev. OK, thank you very much.